Games at your table, and I'm Jonathan Albin. This is Nikos RPG. Today we're going to be talking about the great dragons, that is the big bads of them all, the huge ones. And I'm going to be speaking of them in particular in terms of the great houses of Nimbus. And if you are unaware of the world of Nikos, which if you haven't watched one of my videos before, you probably never heard of it before, but the concept of what a smear job on my camera. Yikes. That was awful. When you are talking about the great dragons, of course, you're speaking of the most majestic and largest of them. And so we're going to be talking about them house by house in reference to the world of Nikos. So a couple of particulars that will be of note to you. Dragons in the world of Nikos arrive from Nimbus initially by making a dimensional jump from the surface of Nimbus, the sun itself, a gas giant of immense size, down to the surface of Nikos. And they do this for breeding purposes. The pressures and the nuances of their lives within the spans of Nimbus are so great that it's impossible for their reproductive processes to work properly, and so they have to, from time to time, drop down to the world of Nikos for reproduction. When they do so, they are perfect in that they are species of medium or larger size and are, by color in nature, crystalline in nature. So they will be of the various gemstone colors, and therefore they're often identified by that. So they will be a topaz dragon or an amethyst dragon in terms of their coloration, but they all share the similar breath weapons of devastating magical energies being expanded over a large area, and are generally uncommunicative. They don't necessarily deign to speak to the people of Nikos. Now, since they live such a long time and their gestation process is considerably long, and their courtship practices are nigh unto impossible to understand, I guess you would say inconceivable, they therefore are part of the warp and the woof, if you will, of normal life in the world of Nikos on a regular basis. And these smallish sized dragons are, if you will, huntable in terms of size. Many of them don't even have names. Often they are given appellations by the locals around them. For example, if one of them particularly likes to laugh instead of get involved in conflict, then perhaps they'll give it the name Laughingly Chuckles or something along that line, but they are not necessarily malevolent. Now, as they stay on the world of Nikos, there's always a danger of injury or calamity or attack by adventuring groups, and the challenge becomes, as they are affected by these despotic individuals, the dragons of the smaller sizes are either eliminated or perhaps coerced. And when they are coerced, they tend to take on the colors of their rage, and therefore the primary colors that we think of, red, black, blue, green, are affixed to them, and they take on those tones to represent which of the emotions they are dealing with. That is to say that a dragon who is particularly jealous will become green, for example, or if a dragon is particularly angry and barbaric and just destructive, they'll take on the deep reds, and so on. So the coloration of the dragons does eventually color their weapons as well, and so over time, and that's decades, they eventually take on the more common ascriptions of red dragon, black dragon, blue dragon, and their weapons are therefore appropriately associated. Now, if we talk of those dragons who come to the world and are unharmed, at the end of their tuition, at the end of their procreation process, they will then once again, when the season is right, jump back to their world. But of course that might be a decade, 2 decades, a century, a millennium before they actually make those transitions. So their size obviously increases over time. The challenge is that once they are injured in any way that harms them, they are incapable of making the jump back home, and therefore the coloration generally has to do with what caused them to be in this state. So there's a lot more detail to it. But we're going to be talking about the great dragons, so we're going to talk about the particular houses. But I wanted to give you kind of a feel for dragons in general before we moved on. So the first thing we have to make sure we understand is that dragons are terrifying by their own nature. Their size and immensity and presence are so incredibly awesome and awe-inspiring that players have to react to them. Now we're going to speak in particular of House Tiora, and the House Tiora is a particular family. Now as we talked about, they come individually and produce heirs who then, when they get to adulthood, can make the jump. But in the case of House Tiora, they've not had a male of their species yet ever successfully return home, although they in theory should be able to. Now they are considered to be a gray dragon, but that has more to do with their actual religious philosophy. They are imbued with the concepts of the gray veil, which means they are functioning as conduits for sheer power. And so the House Tiora, even though they are not expending, they're not returning home, nonetheless they tend to be manipulative and in all terms terrifying, in that their space, their domain itself carries with it the connotations that this monstrous dragon would have. Now, because of its incredible size and its cleverness, it very rarely is found in the open, and only on 2 occasions in the last 3 iterations, so the last 15 real-time years, has Tiora ever been actually visually seen by individuals. Nonetheless, the very terror of their name can send adventure groups running from the areas. So the biggest challenge when you are playing or role-playing with such dragons, you have to run the eventuality and the probability that the players may actually engage with them, and therefore the players should be arguably on their best behavior, so to speak. They have to be ready for anything when these dragons are in their area. So in utilizing theater of the mind, I tend to do a lot of description of the ambiance, the very feel of the air, the concept that the very currents that pass through the domain of Tiora is easily identifiable by the players, and therefore they experience him even before, and perhaps if they never see them. Now, dragons also, by definition, are impressive. And in the case of the House of Loroth, there is absolutely nothing that the purple dragons, if you will, these deep purplish beasts, won't do to show their stuff, so to speak, to the consumer, to the adventurer. Therefore, the size of the dragon matters, how you describe its movement and its magnitude really plays into it. The concept that is in, for example, the Dungeons & Dragons rules, it talks greatly about the lair capabilities of the dragons. Well, the lair abilities fundamentally exude from the dragon himself. So in the case of House Loroth, if you're going to be in its domain, you're going to feel its audacity, its wealth. It's going to be sharing expressions of its previous powers as used. If it has, in the case of House Loroth, developed an understanding of language, it's going to also be presenting examples of its power through its magics. And the older a dragon, in theory, the more they know, the more they can express. And so just realize that dragons can actually take the main stage by themselves. Now, D&D 5e does have a issue with the idea of action economy, and therefore a player group will have clearly outstrip a traditional monstrous dragon. But when you're talking about in the case of your true masters of their domain, such as the dragons of the House Loroth, these monstrosities not only are exemplary in their magics, but they have a prehensile tail, they have very animated wings, they have no problem utilizing the resources of their domain to create confusion and chaos, even before the players have to face them one-on-one. And therefore dragons need to be a magnitude greater than most of the other monsters you might bring to the table for the players to engage with. Next, dragons are dangerous, and none of them are more so than the House Celsiara. And the idea here is that the House Celsiara, pardon me, they are green dragons, but they are Pacifically, here we go, blah, blah, blah. Pacifically, there I said it wrong, specifically dangerous in terms of their breath weapons, in that they are fundamentally the equivalent of a polyglot. Not only do they have a breath weapon that is inflammatory, but they also have a breath weapon that is desperately poisonous, skin sensitive. In some cases, it almost acts like an allergen. The idea, therefore, is that the dragon is a danger, whether asleep or awake. In the case of Celsiara, they can actually present body aroma and fumes that will be literally drowning out the oxygen in an area, because they simply don't need it to breathe any longer. And these dragons represent dangers far more than you might expect. Consider their lair to have cataclysmic drops, tons of fogs and mists, many different types of mysteries. If they are, as in the case of Celsiara, also magical, they will have magic effects that are in place as phantasms that will interact with the players, representing, again, a balancing of that action economy, but also reaching far beyond the boundaries of traditional monsters, because they are, as the saying would go, king of the hill. They are the number one most difficult creature to destroy. Now, in the case of Celsiara, and this is an Easter egg for my players, Celsiara tends to operate within the Wilderlands and is isolated because of choice. They are reminded every day of the devastation that caused their injuries and provide them with great places to hide, but also terrifying domains to explore. So dragons are, above many other things, definitely dangerous. Dragons, by their very nature, command respect. When you hear the word dragon and you are in a fantasy realm, it should cause you to catch your breath. There are those who have great affinity for dragons and expect them to be good and kind. There are some that are not. And either way, you should respect them for their nature. Now, in the House of Kalskanar, we're talking about beings that don't have a problem at all with going toe-to-toe. They are physically powerhouses. They are monstrously effective on destroying players who are unaware and unprepared. Does that mean they always are aggressive and destructive? No. But the trick is that when you are building out the story for your dragons, build in their triggers. Build in what sets them off, what has been their greatest problem. In the House of Kanar, I'm not quite pronouncing it. Kanarga. When you run into the House Kanarga, you end up with a situation of protectiveness by pure definition. They want to be left alone. On those rare occasions when the players must approach them, you must therefore do so in due respect and being kind and understanding with them, realizing that they are not long-suffering and they tend to be a bit chaotic in their approaches. Again, dragon by dragon, there may be differences, but in the case of the dark reds of House Kanaga, you're going to be running into those who are willing to do what it takes to protect their homes. Because of their great size, because of their long lives, because of all the challenges they faced, dragons are proud. And none is more so than the House Valair. In the dragons of House Valair, you have dragons who are self-confident, self-assured, and consider themselves to be most gracious and fair and kind, with very vicious lines that would be, in many cases, considered to be narcissistic. A dragon of the House Valair is not going to let the players run the story on them. So the dragons of House of Valera, I'm actually mispronouncing that one as well. Got to remember to put the on the end of the R. These dragons are clever, oh so clever, and they are not willing to tolerate misgivings or ambiguity or a lack of faith on the case of those that they converse with. So having very proud, very haughty and absolute leads the dragons to also be incredibly severe in their judgments. And so if you find one who is patient, be very afraid, because in his patience he will be confining his discussions on how to overtake the players and cause their downfall rather than himself being brought low. Now, dragons are amazing, and what I mean by that is their capabilities defy all rules. So even if in the situation it's an unnavigable sky because of rains and torrents, nonetheless, dragons can take flight and be caught up in the storm and know exactly where they are operating. Their sensory inputs and the magical connections they have with their realms are such that they are basically untrackable if they choose to be. In the case of House Gruera, you're talking about a bluish species generally found in the heights of the Silver Blades. Of late, their homes may be in question, so they might be on the prowl. But the dragons of House Gruera are going to be absolute terrors in the sky. Pardon me. Gas issues. The concept of a dragon's approach should be visceral. The players should feel the pressure of their wings against the air, even at relatively high altitudes. They should feel the gravity of the situation changing as they come into physical ranges of the player characters. And this can be awe-inspiring to the point where players may actually lose their ability to act simply because of the presence of a dragon. And that is represented by their very presence score itself. And so they are a true danger simply by being. Now, in the case of House Gruera, they are definitely isolationist and would prefer to be left alone. However, they also have a penchant for great valuables. So if they hear of artifacts of power or other items of great utility, they are capable, because of their very nature, to manipulate and operate even items that are beyond their scale and scope. So even small items, if they are powerful, might draw the interest and, unfortunately, the dread of the approaching dragon from that house. Now, they are blue, so their breath weapons tend to be electrical, but as I've said, they can cross different lines and include a frost breath weapon as well as ice and so on. They're multifaceted and are quite often associated with weather itself. And, of course, dragons are incomparable. There's nothing like a dragon. So in the case of the dragons of Snow Inn, you have the capability of communicating with them. As a matter of fact, they are rather clever and have actually studied at length. Most dragons, because of their extreme age, have already learned things like reading and writing. But in the case of dragons like Snow Inn, you'll find that they actually appreciate and enjoy sessions of poetry, sessions of riddles, and such. And they're incomparable because you can be a conversationalist and spend days with them, or you can anger one in an instant and find yourself falling down a very steep, very icy cliff. So realizing that the dragons of the various types, especially those that have been spanning generations and even aeons, are themselves incomparable and something to be experienced at least once in a character's life. Now, as we've talked about the dangerous ones before, we're going to talk a little bit about House Versathrax. But first I want to specify that dragons are volatile. Yes, you can have a placid, even conversation with them if you're on a similar topic to what they wish, but when their attention span is extended to its maximum, they can snap and become a great danger to the players. This means that the players will want to manipulate and control their time in the presence of the dragons. Now, in the case of Versathrax, they are fundamentally associated with disease, plague, and destruction. And while they do have some necromantic magical abilities to cause their very food sources to come to them, they are not by any stretch aware of the value of such things, and therefore you are in great danger if you are in the House Versathrax, because there are things in there that might kill you as soon as breathe on you. So that means that dragons are a great danger regardless of how you've come into their presence. Realize that they could snap at any moment. Now, this also means that dragons are memorable. You can hold on to a story of your time in the presence of a dragon and be made a life-changing event. But realize that sometimes that life-changing event is something that'll take you 40 counselors and 3 boxes of Xanax to get over. And in this case, the House I never can pronounce this right. Pleur Galuf. There you go. Pleur Galuf. I don't have to say it very often because we don't go to where Pleur Galuf lives. He lives in the high spaces of Tirkun and really doesn't have a color. We're showing him as sort of a brown color, but that just refers to dragons who have maintained their initial culture despite all the horrible things that have happened. In the case of Pleur Galuf, he's been unable to return home because he's become diseased. And there are conditions that are within his life that have made it so it's unable to return to its domain, and therefore is the epitome of rage. And what makes a meeting with Pleur Galuf actually memorable is that he doesn't actually pursue, but he does leave things around in his domain that will cause you to remember him forever, because you will have virtually incurable diseases that might infect you. Now, as I said, he is near to the realms of Tirkun, so he has been fundamentally left alone for the better part of 3 iterations. And so going there, he might have some great knowledge that goes back decades and aeons and iterations. But the risk is great to you, and you will certainly not forget the things that happen within the domain of the great dragons. Now, this one's a little hard to swallow for many people. They love dragons as great friends. They've watched movies and have a certain perspective that aligns themselves with dragons, but it's important to know that dragons are the nemesis of living things. Most of them would rather end you and go back home than spend a second talking with you. And so keeping this awareness does explain how dragons such as the House Morda remain. House Morda are a form of topaz dragon and therefore are perfectly capable of going home, but they've also developed a taste for mortal flesh, and not mortal flesh specifically, but the mortal soul. And so they have been associated with the theory that they may have actually devised the Morgul blades themselves at some point in the past. Morgul blades being those soul-destroying weapons that have been menacing the world of Nikos for the last 3 iterations at least. And so to arrive in the House Morda, you have to travel into the highest peaks of the Shatterhorn, as they have isolated their domain for the topaz and are arguably one of the most protective of the dragons, but that also means that they consider all living species to be a threat. So when you are in their domain, you won't be able to find, for example, herd animals or other hunting prey, because they pretty much scour the domain and gather what they need. Now, these nemesis dragons also are ultimately clever, wise, and intellectual par excellence, and therefore getting into a face-to-face with them could end up with your own demise simply because you misspoke or you didn't respect them appropriately. So remember, all these different facets of dragons actually all apply to every one of them. But in the case of House Morda, you have to realize you are on your way to the next world if you dare cross their paths. Alrighty, so now we come to the end. My question is, how do you feel about dragons? Are they something that you find enjoyable and engaging, or are they simply a rough spot in the game? Do your players find them to be a literal threat? Are they actually feeling the fear that perhaps the dragons might be able to instill in them, or have they gotten used to them? Just realize that you can make dragons great again by imposing some or all of these recommendations that I've provided. If you want to know more about them, check out nikosrpg.com for our website. And we are doing our brand opening on the 3rd of May at Board Games Paradise in Redlands, California. More information for that will be available in the comments box below. And also, don't forget, we're doing a big group discount, a reduced price if you purchase the entire what's the word? I put it in the box below. But when you purchase all of the products, you get a discount for that. So check that down below. Thank you for being here. I'm glad to have spoken with you. And as my grandfather always says, go play.